This is the next video explaining in detail the approach of creating artificial digital life. All previous videos are easily accessible by the playlist provided. This time we will introduce predators, or we could also call them carnivores, as opposed to the organisms we had before, which we could call herbivores. Carnivores feed on herbivores. In our model, it is a single gene which switches forth and back between herbivores and carnivores. The mutation rate for this specific gene shall be much smaller than the mutation rate for the genes for movement. Whilst the mutation for movement genes was set to 1 out of 1,000, the mutation of the carnivore gene shall be 1 out of 1,000,000. In order to make carnivores visible, we will display them a bit differently. Whilst the previous cells were depicted as circles, in this screenshot you see them in green or blue to mean different genomes for movement, carnivores would have the same blue color, referring to the same genome for movement, but that color is filling the circle and a red border shows the carnivore gene is switched on. Remember the last video? We saw the initial green cells stay around forever. They were not dying out because of food abundance, and by occupying their position, they would not allow other cells to take their space. But now they could be attacked by carnivores. So let's run the simulation again. As the mutation rate for the carnivore gene is very low, we see the usual development of cells at the beginning. Some develop a genome for movement, but also the initial green cells without a genome for movement stay around. After 5,100 cycles, we see carnivores appear. Quickly they spread, conquering the area previously occupied by the initial green cells. Of course, these carnivores will not destroy all herbivores, because in the end they depend on herbivores as a food source. A certain equilibrium is established, with carnivores and herbivores coexisting. The development is depicted in the graph for in total 10,000 cycles. After roughly 5,000 cycles, carnivores appear, and after 2,000 cycles, the initial green cells without a genome for movement are gone. But in general, herbivores are forming a stable population at a size of 5,000 cells. Let's have a look at a different scenario with an alternative feeding scheme for carnivores. Instead of feeding only on herbivores, they could feed on all creatures that are smaller than themselves. Now, on one hand, also smaller carnivores represent a source of food. On the other hand, bigger herbivores are not a source of food anymore. Bigger in this case means that these cells have accumulated more energy, and energy is accumulated by gathering food. Again, we see carnivores appearing and rising. But in the long run, this scheme is worse for carnivores, as we can tell from the graph. Carnivores are flourishing, starting with cycle 8000, and feeding mainly on the initial green cells without a genome for movement. After 2500 cycles, all of these initial green cells are gone, and afterwards also the carnivores are declining. Their population stays rather small. Only about 5% of all organisms are carnivores. Let's switch back to the first scheme and have carnivores feed on herbivores. This time we are dividing the world into 4 sectors. Remember that the blue lines are like walls, insurmountable for our organisms. Mind the little openings though, through which cells can move from one sector into the adjacent one. Do you expect one carnivore species to appear in spreading, reaching the other part of the world by crossing these openings? Or do you expect separate carnivore species to appear in each of the 4 regions? Here's what we get in the simulation. We see a first carnivore species appear in the lower region. But almost immediately afterwards, a different species appear in the upper region. Both species are spreading to the adjacent regions. To finish, let's put our organisms into a more complicated world, a world resembling a maze. As always, we first see herbivores conquer the world. As the blue walls are insurmountable, they need their time, but they do quite well. Again, during that process we see ever new genomes appear, as we can tell from the different colors. Finally, they spread all over the world, inside and outside the maze, and the world looks quite in an equilibrium. But at a certain point in time, inevitably, carnivores appear through mutation. Watch how they propagate through the maze until they reach even the center region and wipe out the initial green cells. The development of the various populations, as depicted in the graph, differs a little bit from the previous ones. The initial green cells survive a little longer after carnivores appear in the world, as it takes some time before they are found within the maze. In this video, we had introduced a new gene switching between herbivore and carnivore behavior. In the next video, we will expand on this and introduce more genes, especially genes to control when cells are actually creating offsprings. Until now, in our model, organisms would create an offspring as soon as possible. That is, when they have enough energy and they find empty space where to place their offspring. Would this change if we leave this up to evolutionary optimization? Maybe they would delay the creation of offsprings. On one hand, it seems sensible to reproduce as fast as you can. On the other hand, it might have some advantages to preserve energy a little longer, which can help you to migrate through regions with little food and thus surviving instead of you and your offspring starving. There is another very interesting parameter to put to the test. Usually in computer simulations, the mutation rates are fixed by the program. What if organisms could adjust the mutation rate themselves? That is, they determine themselves the error rate for copying their own genome. This sounds crazy in a way, because mutation will be applied to the genome for the mutation rate. The genome for the mutation rate will be mutated and will be subject to an evolutionary process. We could call that evolution squared. And again, the result of such an evolutionary optimization is not obvious at all. Would the mutation rate tend towards zero because genomes want to survive as they are and hence hate mutations, so to speak? Or would it increase because it leads to a higher flexibility and hence such organisms are in favor to survive? Or would it bounce around, ever changing with no trend at all? We will see. Stay tuned.